As some players start getting ready, building their new UIs from the demolition of their add-ons that is about to happen in a few hours, they are there tinkering about which setups to go for, how to shape their new UI. There is also another thing that is quite relevant by the time the pre-patch launches and the slightly more than a month we have before the release, the early access release of the expansion, which is the specs. The specs to play, the specs to pick, the spec to choose for the expansion. So the question now is, we're looking at which specs look like they are the most complete, the most finished, the most product ready for the expansion. Now, this doesn't have necessarily to do with their power level. There might be some specs that are doing top damage, for example, right now in the beta, while having a spellbook with 2 buttons and nothing else. The spec is awful, plays terribly, but the numbers are tuned highly. Instead, what we're looking at is very simply how the spec has been developed, how have they been hit by the pruning and by the changes of Blizzard to look like and feel like a complete spec. So the first in line are the best ones. We immediately start with a list of best specs right now, which are the ones over here. What these specs have in common is that they feel complete, they feel finished. In some cases, some of these specs might not even have gotten a lot of changes from the War Within, which might be disappointing. It might lower your hype a bit if you were expecting some variety, some novelty from a new expansion, but, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Like Frost Decay. Frost Decay has practically lost nothing from the War Within. It plays almost exactly the same from the War Within. It is a basically product-ready spec already. Others down this list are Havoc Demon Hunter, which did get a few more changes here and there, but it is still a very complete spec. You can see here the highlight of triple evoker spec all in here. All 3 specs have been changed quite a good amount, yet despite being changed a good amount, they are all doing very well right now in terms of being complete as a spec. Even if augmentation have now his Hebon Might being raid wide, no longer a targeted buff, there is much less IQ, spreadsheet making mechanics you have to do to properly min-max your augmentation evoker. It has been streamlined way more, but most of the changes are very positive. Devastation also has gotten many positive changes, despite initially feeling restrictive, because, for example, you lost Firestorm as a button, you lost Shattering Star as a button. The introduction of Azure Sweep, an extra button in your rotation, and a few of the changes, the very good Apex talent you have now as a Devastation Evoker, is still making the spec looking quite a complete one. Even Preservation, the one that lost the most in here. Lost Emerald Communion, lost Spirit Bloom, lost Lifebind as a raid-wide buff, lost potentially Dreamflight as well. Still has gotten many good improvements, possibly very likely a build built around your Emerald Blossom will work finally in the next expansion with very good accompanying new talents to enable this Emerald Blossom style in the new expansion. All of these were very good to support a finished spec. The mages are also looking quite nice right now, both Arcane and Frost with their changes coming in Midnight. Frost in particular having their entire package reworked into breaking freezing stacks that you generate is very similar now to the old Unholy Death Knight and Festering Wounds you would put on the target to then blow them up, except Frost can do this much faster, build them up much more quickly and break them more quickly. Arcane is a bit bittersweet. The spec itself works, the base setup of the spec works, the base rotation and your cooldowns, Arcane Surge and Touch of the Magi all work very nicely. You have a few more problems, you are a bit more restricted, especially in your talent and talent choices. But if you are just judging the spec in how it works, and by the time the expansion releases, Arcane is looking very nice. Same for the 2 tanks over here, Brewmaster and Prot Paladin. They both have received changes, way more protection than Brewmaster, but even Brewmaster itself, very good additions, as we mentioned multiple times when we went over tanks, very good addition to your smooth, standard self-healing, thanks to your Apex talent and your new damage leech talent. You're now way more resistant, way less in need of a pocket healer babysitting you compared to before. Meanwhile, Protection Paladin has received many good QOLs. The fact that you no longer are chained to stay inside of your consecration for your buffs. Now you no longer need to stay inside. Good CDR, cooldown reduction on your biggest cooldowns, defensive cooldowns, Ardent Defender and Guardian of Ancient Ancient Kings, many passive buffs to give you more base defensiveness, just like Brewmaster with the self-healing. For Prot Paladin it was base armor. You got your base armor and your Shield of the Righteous base armor both buffed. All in all, it's looking very good. The last one at this point is a classic. It's enhancement. It has won this the combat reworks / the combat changes for the spec look amazing. It's been kind of the same since like Dragonflight in terms of changes they received, and it is still true in this expansion so far. Enhancement looks combat-wise very good. A very spec ready, expansion ready spec right now in how it plays. These for now have been the best ones, the ones that are more complete, more finished, more product ready for the expansion, so we shouldn't even expect too many changes, or we wouldn't even want too many changes from the time it takes from the pre-patch to the expansion. Now, a step lower, we have a few more specs. We have Blood, Vengeance, Ret, Disc, and Demonology. So for the two tanks, they are in a similar line to the two tanks we just mentioned, but they need a bit more. DK might feel a little biased right now for many players because they have been nerfed quite a lot, so they went from being the most played and strongest tank in the beta to being nearly the weakest one because of the nerfs they received. But that doesn't mean the spec is now broken, doesn't mean the spec is now awful. It's just weak from a numbers perspective. So all it would take to fix it are some bigger, larger numbers. The biggest issue right now isn't even with the Blood itself or its talents, but rather their hero talents and the weakness of both Deathbringer and Sunlane. Sunlane because it was nerfed tremendously, and Deathbringer because it was weak already, and it hasn't really received any meaningful buffs. But, you know, if we have to worry for a spec about buffing the numbers of a hero talent, it means you are in a good situation. It means you don't have too many things to complain about, if the things you want to complain about the most are these kind of worries. Vengeance is a completely different matter. We mentioned this multiple times. The major problem for Vengeance was the simplification of the spec. So, no longer having to worry about the multiple stacks of frailty, no longer having to worry about your sigil of flame or sigils in general, or the spreading of your fiery brand. You have had overall a lot of tools that have been simplified and made easier to track. A few things are now lacking in your rotation. For example, if you're playing Aldrachi Reaver instead of Felscard, you barely even click Fel Devastation, you barely even bother with Sigil of Flame. You're like losing these buttons because they have become so weak. That's kind of the major issue right now for Vengeance. But outside of that, the spec does feel complete, just like Red Paladin. Red Paladin has not really changed a lot from the War Within, will not change a lot from the War Within to Midnight. The biggest change for Ret is losing one of your smaller, I guess, mini cooldowns, Final Reckoning. Besides losing Final Reckoning, and like all Paladins, Hammer of Wrath now is a replacement of Judgment as a button once you enter Avenging Wrath, and that's it. The spec still plays basically the same. There aren't really many changes to Red, so the spec itself is still quite complete. Disc did receive more changes. Unlike Red Paladin, you are now much more shield based because of your Apex talent, because of your triple shield, void shield effect. The biggest issue right now isn't even the way the spec plays. It could be an issue for the old school disc players who enjoyed the spec because of its ramping qualities, its high IQ, very prepared and proactive kind of rotations in the raid, for example, but rather the issue that this style based on shields heavily favors Oracle, because Oracle itself is buffing your shields, because your Apex talent and your empowered shields work when you cast Penance, and Oracle gives you a second charge of Penance when Voidweaver does not. So you do have a very weak right now hero talent. That's just about the biggest problem for Disc. Meanwhile, Demo is also looking quite fine. You've gotten a few extra talents, a few extra demons in your Midnight changes, like getting your Implord or Fel Ravager options, your Dominion of Argus Apex talent, which is, surprise, going to spawn demons. You do have a few issues with some weaker and previously some still bugged talents, and the lack of a proper set of talent choices for AoE damage, which is lacking behind a little bit right now for Demo, but nothing major. The spec right now is still feeling very complete. A tier below them, you have the ones somewhat in the middle, you know, somewhat halfway through. They do feel finished, they are kind of decent to play, but they might have one or two glaring issues you might want to see fixed, or you wish you will see them fixed before the release of the expansion. For example, warriors. There isn't much to say about Prot Warrior because it is the most same of the specs. In terms of changes, it is the one that has received more or less the least of the changes, so you're not expecting too much there. Meanwhile, for the other warriors, especially Arms, their biggest issue is rage. Arms is getting tremendously rage starved right now in the beta. You lost a lot of your rage generation talents like Battle Lord, like Skull Splitter, Finishing Blows, Warlord Torment, even the already existing extra rage help buttons like Tactician and Sudden Death are proccing less, which makes you starved in rage way more. That's your goal you want to see fixed before the expansion releases. Meanwhile, for Affliction, your issue with Affliction is that while you were busy celebrating, finally no longer having to use Malefic Rapture as your spender, now that finally it's back, your spender is back being Unstable Affliction, the issue is that you have these counterintuitive situations where you pop your CD Dark Glare, your Shadow Bolt is transformed into a much harder hitting Malefic Grasp, except you are in your cooldown window where you kind of wanted to spam your Unstable Affliction. So now what do you do between the two? Do you Malefic Grasp or do you Unstable Affliction? So you are in this odd situation between these setups for Affliction, but it is something somewhat minor to fix as a spec. It's not some game breaking or rotation flow breaking, especially since it only happens in between your CDs. Others like Survival, as we mentioned, have a bit of an excess problem. We mentioned we wanted to see Focus actually do something for Survival, since right now it was almost free. Blizzard nerfed it, it made your abilities cost way more focus now, but still there is no payoff. You don't actually gain much by spending this focus. It doesn't feel nice to be spending that focus, or you don't feel rewarded by having spent the focus properly. That was kind of the problem with Survival, alongside your complete inability to split AoE and single target situations. You don't have talents for one or the other. You kind of play the same in any situation, in any target situation. That's the main issue for Survival. So these ones right here do just have a couple of things you might want to see fixed that might sour your feel of playing the spec a bit once the expansion launches and these issues are not fixed by Blizzard. Lower down is where we start to see some bigger, deeper problems where you might be more concerned by these issues. We have Feral, Guardian, Fire, Elemental, and Destruction. Destruction is a bit of an asterisk because Destruction technically is very samey to what you have played before as a Destruction, but you have lost a whole bunch of smoothing out talent settings. For example, after you were happy that Soulfire made it into your rotation, finally you have an extra button. Now though, Decimation is lost in Midnight. The faster casting buff is now lost, which is now miserable, makes it more miserable to play Soulfire. Even just with the backdraft 30% buff, it still feels kinda off, as well as other rotation smoothing talents like Ritual of Ruin for more faster casting and free Soul Shard casts. So this is, at the end, still puts Destro into this spam Incinerate, use Conflagrate for the cast buff for your Chaos Bolt, and just repeat. You don't have too many options. Even the attempt of making, for some reason, Shadow Burn no longer a cooldown execute spell but a spender, costing a Soul Shard instead of Chaos Bolt, is very weird. Doesn't really fit much of anywhere as a Destro lock. That's the kind of problems you have with specs being here. Guardian is another one. The biggest one of their issues is being still, despite many of the positive changes going to Guardian, it is being gated, being cock-blocked by being a cooldown spec. You have your Incarnation, even with your cooldown reduction, you are practically a spec once every 2 minutes, and then you have to wait. Your Apex talents don't help, number one, because they activate after you use your big cooldown, and number two, even if you can delay them, even if you can hold on them, which is very hard because as a tank you can't hold on Iron Fur or Frenzied Region for that long anyways, even then the effect of the Apex talents is too weak to function as a mini cooldown, for example. That's the biggest issue for Guardian. If I were a Guardian tank, my biggest hope for Blizzard was to decouple as a choice node your Incarn and your Convoke, so you can have 2-minute Incarnation windows and 1-minute Convoke windows to be able to have these smaller power windows as a tank in Mythic Plus being your biggest issue for Guardian right now. Meanwhile, you have other slightly more depressing cases like Elemental, which is more about losing more of your identity, losing more of the features that made you a spec, made you feel like the Elemental Shaman. You're losing Ice Fury, you're losing the Frost Shock proc, you're losing your deeply rooted elements, Ascendance proc, Primordial Wave, Liquid Magma Totem. A lot of the power, the buffs of your elementals are too weak right now, so even if you talent into your elementals, you still feel weak as an Elemental Shaman. It might still play okay, especially if you were used to it already, but it's still not a very fully finished feeling kind of spec. Deeper down, we are getting closer and closer to Doom in here. We have Resto, Mistweaver, the two ranged hunters, and those two buttons. Resto is just a deeper, worse situation than Elemental. They have lost even more things than Elemental, and more importantly, a lot of these things were proc buffs, for example, for Chain Heal, which is making Chain Heal now feel much weaker than before, as well as just good and nice, rewarding feeling buttons like checking up your mana levels before High Tide procs and have good use of that Chain Heal, checking up your casts of your Healing Wave for your Mega Undulation proc. Same goes with timing the cooldowns of your Tidebringer for another much empowered, faster casting Chain Heal. All of these things are gone. The spec feels now much more flat, with much less power on your Chain Heal. You are much more of a Riptide spam, Healing Wave spam bot kind of spec, which feels quite bad right now. On top of all of the utility and even worse, defensiveness, tankiness you have lost in Midnight. Mistweaver is in similar deep problems. Mistweaver, at the moment, their biggest issue really is mana. They go out of mana in a minute in a raid encounter. And you have lost perhaps a few of the tools which made your caster style of Mistweaver in the raid, the spreading of Renewing Mist, the increased healing on Renewing Mist, on a few things like Rushing Wing Kick, which now no longer gives you the healing increase of Renewing Mist, it's just a flat heal now, or the Mending Proliferation buff to spread your healing increase, your Enveloping Mist healing increase to other players, as well as your Apex talents themselves being quite disappointing, the whole Spirit Font effect just feeling very weak. And back to reiterate, worst of all, their mana issues for Mistweaver. BM and Marksmanship just have received poor changes, that's all it is. Many of the changes are not really positive for both of them. They lost a lot. Marksmanship especially losing Explosive Shot, plus getting Aim Shot to have a longer cast time, have made the spec feel even more barren than it was before, if it was possible. BM also haven't received that many positive changes. They have a very poor set of talents, half useless small number increases. Other half is the split between AoE and single target talents, which can handicap you, whichever one of the two you choose. Still issues with Dark Ranger, especially with BM, making your Withering Fire and your Black Arrow work properly with BM has been made worse in Midnight, just not in general very positive changes for both of these specs. The two buttons at the end, as it was expected, is Devour, Demon Hunter, the new spec coming out. It's just what it is. It's just what it says. It has two buttons. No matter how smooth the spec might be playing, it is still smooth pressing two buttons. More or less, you're pressing two buttons. It's just too little. It's just not enough for you to feel like a complete spec right now. You need at least one more, if not a couple more buttons. It might be like that once you play Void Scarred, and if Void Scarred becomes viable. So at least you enter a situation as a Devoured Demon Hunter where you can play with Fellblade and you can play with Hungering Slash, resetting its cooldowns when you enter Metamorphosis. So you have the Hunt plus Hungering Slash and Voidblade and more buttons to press, but as of right now, it just feels too empty, unless you are forcefully going for that particular row of talents, which at the moment isn't even the viable one. But then we are at the bottom. The absolute worst ones, the ones that are so bad you are kind of expecting them to be abandoned until you reach 12.1, 6 months from the release of the expansion for a rework. These are Windwalker, Holy Priest, and then the entirety of Rogue. Why not? So, Windwalker has just been victim of a few quite disappointing choices by Blizzard, like removing Storm, Earth and Fire as a button, which you rejoice because it was filled with bugs and hard to manage, but then you don't replace it with anything. Your Weapons of Order, now renamed Zenith, is scientifically speaking a shit cooldown, which feels very poor. On top of that, Invoke Zhuen is losing Invoker's Delight. You are losing your personal Bloodlust inside of your cooldowns on top of having lost one of your cooldowns, Stormwind and Fire, so your big burst window has been tremendously weakened. You have other confusing choices like putting two very well beloved and used talents like Strike of the Windlord and Whirling Dragon Punch as a choice node, but then keeping the terribly hated Empower Spell Slicing Winds as a button, which is a quite confusing choice. The whole of Windwalker now feels much more neutered compared to the War Within. Holy Priest is even worse. You have gotten some confusing changes for Holy Priest, despite not really gaining basically anything new as a spec. Blizzard took a previously early level talent option, very low healing Cosmic Ripple, and decided to make it the entire focus of the three. Together with the Apex talents, further empowering this Cosmic Ripple, it just doesn't feel good. The changes don't feel good. Even the last talent, Ultimate Serenity, Blizzard actually giving you an option to completely remove 50% of your Holy Words, because it gives you the option to turn Sanctify into Serenity. You just lose Sanctify completely. So now you have a single Holy Word, a single target Holy Word and Flash Heal that you spam all the time with Prayer of Mending on cooldown. Of course, once again, expansion number 3, Blizzard is completely ignoring Prayer of Healing. It's not a button. Priests don't want to click it. It's going to be a failed one once again. So overall, the state of Holy Priest is quite dire coming into the pre-patch. Same goes for all rogues. They feel kind of abandoned right now, have been for quite a while. All three specs have been significantly neutered of buttons to varying degrees. Outlaw is the one that is the more same as the War Within. Problem is still very poor. Outlaw has terrible issues with energy. Outlaw is getting very energy starved right now. The first minute to minute and a half you will feel like you're doing kind of good because Thistle Tea exists and it gives you the energy to feel like you can press buttons, and then after that you will start getting significantly starved in energy. And not even as an Outlaw rogue, with Adrenaline Rush, with your extra energy regen, it will make up for it. The other two specs are worse because of the pruning they have received. Subtlety, having lost multiple buttons from your Rapture dot to your Symbols of Death to even buttons right now not used like Gloomblade or Gorm's Bite, you are left just using Shadow Strike and Eviscerate with your secret technique on cooldown inside of your Shadow Dance. That's all you have. That's very, very straightforward. Not a lot of options, not a lot of choice for sub, not a lot of diversity, not a lot of thinking you have to do, setting up of different buffs like you used to have as a sub rogue. That's all gone. Assassination is even worse. The previously dot spec now is much more simplified. You have a much simpler way, at the very least, a much simpler way to spread your dots because of Crimson Tempest. Just keep targeting your main target and keep automatically spreading your dots. That's fine, but that's all you have. You enter combat, you apply Garrote, you apply Rapture, you spam a few Crimson Tempests in a Mythic Plus pool, and then you're just there using Envenom. That's kind of about all you have as an assassination rogue. There is not a lot of finesse, not a lot of timing, a lot of buffs or procs you have to take advantage of now as a spec, and it has felt like this for a while. Many rogue players might have kept better count than me, but it feels like rogues in general have not been received any meaningful changes in the beta for weeks, if not months. They have gone very, very untouched as a class as a whole, not just even as a particular spec. That's the current biggest issue for the rogues right now, which is why we feel like they might require some more heavy passes that might require an entire new patch rather than just a few hot fixes, a few numbers tuning like some of these other specs might get. So this is what we have in terms of the state and the look of the specs as we get close to pre-patch. Doesn't mean that this is what we will get in pre-patch itself, not that how specs are doing in the pre-patch matters much. You won't even have your Apex talents available or your full hero talents available. It's still, of course, a work in progress, but this serves as a bookmark. We're gonna do it now so that a bit over a month from now, by the time the expansion releases, or even almost 2 months from now, by the time Mythic Plus season and the raids release, we get to then see how many of these issues have Blizzard solved for these specs compared to the problems we see right now. So we will keep this as a memory going in the future to see the improvements, but for now this is what we have on this Monday. Now, we can now leave each other for today. We're starting our goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, another one of those nose itchy curse is back.